Somebody who has travelled a long distance to be with us tonight is our very special guest this evening. She's a very impressive woman. She's a businesswoman. I'm sorry, first of all, she's a wife. I've got to get my priorities right. She's a wife. She's a mother of two lovely teenagers. She's a businesswoman, an organisational coach, a wise mentor with numerous qualifications in business, human resources and mindfulness. And she has a powerful story to share. Please give a very warm welcome to Jenny Steadman.
I am so grateful to have the opportunity to be here with you tonight. And hasn't the atmosphere in the room been absolutely amazing this evening? Well, I invite you to join me this evening to whatever degree you feel comfortable on a journey of openness, understanding, and kindness. Let's shed light on a difficult topic, not just to acknowledge its existence, but to understand its impact, support those affected, and find pathways to change. By speaking the unspoken, we have the power together to make a real difference. And as much as I'd love to be a mind reader and know exactly what would best support you as we talk about this, unfortunately, I'm not that good. All I can ask is that in these next moments that are actually pretty difficult to share and maybe difficult to hear, if there's a kindness that you can show to yourself or to those around you as we talk about this tonight, then I really encourage you to do so. So I have a thought about the unspoken. How many times have we remained silent on issues that deeply affect us and our communities? In every society, there are topics that linger in the shadows, subjects deemed too uncomfortable, too controversial, or understandably too painful for us to talk about openly. These are the conversations that are often only just hinted at, whispered, if spoken at all. And we label these topics as taboo, and they sit like elephants in the room in our collective cultural unspoken rule book. And why do we find these hard to talk about? Well, I'd say many reasons. For people who want to talk, they often say to me that they fear shame, guilt, discomfort with the unknown. And for some, they say it's like the weight of historical and cultural baggage is preventing them from speaking. And then for those who are listening, they often say to me, I just don't feel like I've got the skills to talk about what was previously unspoken. And so they don't. But topics move from shadow to light. Think for a moment about how the narratives around, say, mental health or menopause have evolved over the years. Not so long ago, these were subjects that were shrouded in secrecy and stigma. Today, we are beginning, and I'll emphasize beginning, to embrace these conversations, understanding that openness leads to greater empathy, support, and healing. But there are still many topics that remain in the shadows, ones that we hesitate to talk about. And among these is one that is critically important, yet deeply challenging to confront, and that's the issue of sexual violence. This is something that affects far too many people, directly or indirectly, including our precious children. And yet it remains veiled in layers of silence and stigma. But remember, topics can move from shadow to light. And like many people, I experienced sexual violence as a child. And this was an ordeal I didn't even know existed, let alone anything I could ever possibly imagine happening to me or others. And yet it did happen to me. And because of this awful experience, I want to do everything I can to help prevent that from occurring to others. And I really want to help alleviate the suffering of those who've similarly experienced it. In my view, while ever it remains a taboo topic, victims of abuse suffer, and perpetrators find it easier to commit these horrendous crimes without consequence. And I'll share bits of my story, but at no point through this will I suggest that what I did should be what others do, or that you'll get an outcome that looks like mine, or that you should feel what I feel. We're all different. I'm sharing this simply in the spirit of openness and to shine a light on what's often kept in the dark, knowing that my story is just simply, sadly, one of hundreds of thousands. And my story began over 40 years ago and still hasn't reached its conclusion, as you'll hear. I was first sexually assaulted as an 11-year-old while I was billeted, staying with a family. And I told my parents after this first instance, but perhaps because of the taboo nature of what happened to me and the fact that it was the early 1980s, their decision was to do nothing about it. We kept it quiet and we didn't ever discuss it again. Had we reported to police, we would have discovered that this person who went on to become a convicted jailed pedophile was already sexually assaulting others. And we may have been able to prevent the needless suffering of many other children. And then later, when I was raped as a 15-year-old by a different person in a completely different setting, it felt like a damaging precedent had already been set. I knew that I mustn't talk about this. I should act like it didn't happen. And in silence, I privately attempted to patch myself together, be stoic, normal, and just try to get on with my life. And there are more awful details about this rape that I considered sharing, but chose not to delve into tonight. And there are some of the details that I'm legally bound not to discuss. But know this, my reason for not giving more of this horrible information about what happened to me is not out of a reluctance to speak the truth. Rather, it's a consideration for this setting and my care for the well-being of all of us here tonight. That detail is for a different forum. But as I dug deep within myself, grappling with what to say, I realised that a reason why I wanted to share more was because I feared that if I didn't do so, you wouldn't believe me. And this underscores a deeper issue that many survivors face. The fear of not being believed, along with the additional layers of pain in sharing our stories, and the hope that when we do speak up, our words will be met with understanding and belief. And opening up about these experiences is such a challenge in itself. But the aftermath of living through a trauma like that often follows a very, very difficult and winding path. For me, as a 15-year-old, it's like I was nearly crippled by devastating nightmares. It's hard to explain. Nightmares so dark and violent, the poison of them would live in my body for days, clouding everything I did with a trembling fear that I found hard to shake. And I still, even now, all these years later, suffer from these nightmares, reminding me of the deep and lasting hurt of being raped. And for decades, I did everything I could to try to ignore the reality of what happened to me and just get on with my life. But the pain kept increasing. And after I had my children in my later 30s, I felt an overwhelming rage about the injustices I had experienced. But because I had children, I was too fearful to report the crimes. I didn't want any revenge-style attacks to be taken out on my kids. But as the years went on, I couldn't not take action. I had to do something. And I spoke with my wonderful husband, who's here tonight, Andrew, my dear friend Justine, who's also here tonight, and beautiful Kylie, who couldn't make it. And I want to say I am so grateful to you for all of the immense support that you've provided me over these long years. Thank you. And I had counselling and I received advice. And one of the most reassuring pieces of information I received from someone with deep expertise in this area is that revenge attacks rarely, if ever, occur, which was such a relief for me. And I spoke with my children who wanted me to seek justice. And the day I reported to police, my daughter, who is also here this evening, hugged me with such pride. And Amelia, that is a moment I will always remember. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. She said she loves me more. And from the moment I told the detective, something surprising happened that I just didn't expect. I felt like a decades-long weight start to lift off my shoulders. As awful and horrible as it is to give a statement to police. And then reporting to police led to an investigation, to charges being laid, to a trial last year, and finally, a guilty verdict. And though that verdict was now 9 months ago, we're still waiting on sentencing to occur, which will, or I probably should say should happen if there are no further delays, in just 2 weeks' time. So I'm still very much living this right now. And so I'm sure you would agree with me that we need to shine a light on this dark topic and make it easier for victims to speak up and to get the support that they need. So what can you do? What's an act of kindness you can do? And I want to acknowledge again just how difficult this can be for victims. And so I'm now speaking directly to those in the room with this lived experience. I know it can be so hard. There's so much you've been through. And maybe the greatest thing that we can do is to speak to ourselves with care and compassionate kindness. And if or when the time is right, we might be able to reach out to someone or take that next step. And if you are here in the room as someone who is told about abuse, what can you do? What's an act of kindness you can do? Can you give that person the time and space to be present, to listen, to believe, to care, to help them feel not alone? And for others, perhaps the act of kindness that you could do is to donate to the Daniel Morcombe Foundation. Their extraordinary efforts are transforming the culture of silence surrounding this critical issue. And take, for instance, their Bright Futures program, which equips children, the adults who care for them, and frontline professionals with the essential skills to recognise early signs of abuse and risk factors. And this is making sure that those children at risk of abusing are receiving early intervention and support. I ask you to please generously support them, because the wonderful work of all of the people at the Daniel Morcombe Foundation to pave the way for lasting change is both courageous and inspiring. And if you're here as a politician or as a person of influence, what can you do to turn the dial towards kindness, policy improvement, investment and support? And if you hear only one thing I say tonight, let me ask you to hear this. You don't have to be an expert in any of this. You just have to care. And so to finish, through my experience, a few insights. To the children who might hear this, and really anyone of any age, if you've experienced an injustice, it's okay to tell someone you trust. You can tell someone you trust. It's okay to talk about sexual violence, and whatever you experienced was not your fault. And I want carers of children to know that we must talk about sexual violence and inappropriate behaviour. And thanks to the Daniel Morcombe Foundation, there are all sorts of age-appropriate resources available now to help us with explaining this to kids. And if we see or hear of anything where our precious children are in danger, we must pay attention, listen, believe and take action. Or as the Morcombes say, recognise, react and report. As well, I want possible offenders out there to know that even if 5, 10, 20, or in my case, 40 years go past, they can still be found guilty. Don't do it. We may have been vulnerable and helpless as kids, but we don't stay that way. We grow up, we remember, we grow strong, and we will seek justice. And so I stand here as someone who has suffered greatly, but I feel like I've built a formidable tower of strength inside. Yes, I still suffer nightmares. Yes, I still feel unsafe in the world. But yes, I will continue to talk about this, speak the unspoken, and stand up for justice so that victims of sexual violence know that they are not alone, and there are many of us who care. And I speak up so that I, my children, and all of us can live in a safer, kinder world. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to be here with you tonight. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Jenny, thank you so much for telling your story in such an eloquent fashion. And I'm sure by speaking out and sharing your personal experience, you will help many others. So thank you, and thank you to Andrew and Amelia and Justine, your team support. Thank you for being in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, would you thank Jenny Steadman once more?